Now we're going to talk about Erikson's third stage of identity, which is initiative versus guilt. Okay, again, this is his third stage. The first one was trust versus mistrust, and the second was autonomy versus shame and doubt. So now in preschool, we have initiative versus guilt. So results of the previous stages. If children have successfully navigated the first two stages, they enter this one able to focus, follow directions, and behave less defiantly. They will have a healthy sense of autonomy and not be overly burdened by shame and/or doubt. They learn by trial and error because they aren't too afraid of making mistakes. They don't feel guilt after failing, they just try again. So what is initiative? Well, preschool years are when children's energy splits into glory or destruction, according to Erikson. I love that quote for preschoolers, glory or destruction. Adults must not overmanage or hover around the child working or do tasks for the child that he or she is capable of doing. Adults need to encourage independence and confidence, focus on their gains, not their mistakes. Children have different cognitive and emotional capabilities, which adults need to recognize and take into consideration. Don't assume one child can do something just because another the same age can do it. And don't say things like, your brother could do this when he was your age. Every child is different. So initiative is when children will do things on their own without prompting, and they'll stay focused on it. So guilt. If children are criticized too much or removed from tasks before being given the chance to practice and master them, their initiative will turn into guilt and defeatism. They will quit rather than risk making a mistake. Adults should be careful not to have expectations beyond the child's ability because children may just conclude they can't do it and give up. Even children who succeed when pushed can carry a heavy load of guilt. So don't put value on the child based on what they can do instead of who they are. Children who feel inadequate are the ones who are constantly going to the teacher or parents asking for approval. So you don't want to make them feel guilty when they can't accomplish something. Don't make them feel shame. Otherwise, they just won't want to do it anymore. So how do we help children through this stage? Well, we need to have patience. Have patience to let the child learn through trial and error and through perseverance. Don't immediately step in when they make a mistake. Encourage them to try again. And even if that means sitting and watching for 5 minutes while they try to tie their own shoes, that's what we need to do whenever we can. Allow mistakes. Allow the child to discover and correct their own mistakes. If encouraged to learn from mistakes, the child will grow confidence and the desire to contribute. So again, don't shame them. Let them make mistakes and encourage them to learn from those mistakes. And use play to help them gain mastery. Erikson emphasized the need for a child to play with real toys and objects to gain a sense of mastery. Let them use a real screwdriver, stir real food, etc. So in this, he agreed with Montessori, which is allowing children to use real tools and do real tasks. So now we're going to switch to self-esteem. So what shapes a child's self-esteem? Well, their temperament is part of it. Remember, easy temperament means children who don't get upset easily. They go with the flow. They're generally happy and pleasant. Easy temperament children tend to develop higher self-esteem. It's probably because since they're so easy, they get along better from their parents. They tend to get more affection and praise, and that helps them have more self-esteem. Whereas a child with a difficult temperament might be scolded more often or have parents who are less patient or understanding, and that might lower their self-esteem. So temperament does play a role. Parenting. Parenting is always important. Parents who are willing to discuss rules and discipline with the child tell the child that their opinions are important enough to be heard. This is authoritative parenting. So that authoritative parenting, explaining the rules, letting children voice their opinions, helps their self-esteem. Also, the parent's consistent warmth, affection, and involvement sends the message you are important. That part comes from attachment. So children with secure attachments also have higher self-esteem. In preschool, they're starting to compare themselves to their peers, and their approval and rejection from peers starts to matter to them. So if they look around and see that they're not as good at something as their peers and their peers tease them about it, then their self-esteem might suffer. But if they get approval from their peers, their self-esteem might raise. So all of these things together form an emerging belief system that the child has about themselves and their own self-worth. And that becomes internalized, and that's just how they feel about themselves. Are they worthwhile? Or do their parents love them? Do their peers approve of them? They start to form an idea of who they are, and this all shapes their self-esteem. So self-esteem is the highest in preschool, and it's at the lowest at the start of junior high, which is just around puberty. So preschoolers still, for the most part, think they're fantastic. Their self-esteem is really high. They really don't have bad things to say about themselves. But when children are starting junior high, they're going through puberty, which is a very challenging time for them. They're moving into a new frame of thought, which can create some problems, and they're dealing with new social position. They're moving from elementary school to a new junior high school, and it changes everything. But remember, preschoolers still have a pretty high self-esteem. So praise. We need to talk about how to praise children. There is a wrong way to praise. First, let's talk about intrinsic versus extrinsic motivation. So intrinsic motivation comes from within. It's when you want to do something for yourself, for its own sake, because it's fun, because it's enjoyable, because it's satisfying. Extrinsic motivation is when you're doing something in order to get a reward, like a prize or a good grade or your approval from your parents. Those are all extrinsic motivations. So remember, children who feel inadequate are the ones who are constantly going to the teacher or parent asking for approval. They're always looking for that extrinsic reward. So they'll say, like, I drew this picture, do you like it? Instead of just drawing from intrinsic motivation, which is because they enjoy it and take pride in their work. So children who are insecure in themselves are the ones who usually rely on extrinsic motivation. So can there be too much praise? As a parent or a teacher, don't rush to give praise, especially to these children who are constantly seeking it. You might think you're encouraging their self-esteem, but the results can be the opposite. So the way we praise and how often we do it is linked to the child's self-esteem, their resilience, which is how well they can bounce back from adversity or frustration, and their perseverance, how long can they stay on the task and keep trying despite mistakes. So too much praise or using incorrect praise can actually decrease all of these. So let's talk about how to praise. How do we give effective, appropriate praise? Well, be sincere, or be specific. Be specific to the accomplishment. Not you're so smart or you're so good at math. Instead say you did really well on that math test, or you're getting so good at adding. So make this praise very specific to that accomplishment. Be sincere. Don't be insincere. Children can tell. When you give praise, make sure you mean it. And be intermittent. Constant praise can have negative effects. Essentially, too much of a good thing can be a bad thing. If they're constantly getting praise, then it becomes like a drug, and that's all they want. But if praise is intermittent, only when you really mean it, then it becomes worth more. It has a higher value. And be sure to praise the effort, not the outcome. Even when they fail, praise the effort. So there was a study, or several studies like this, where students completed simple puzzles and were given a score on how well they did. Children were divided into two groups. One was told, you must be really smart. Children in the other group were told, you must have worked really hard. Then children in both groups were given an option to take a harder test. The students praised for their effort took the harder test. The students praised for their intelligence did not. According to the researcher of this study, he said, emphasizing effort gives children a variable they can control. Children who are told they are smart show less ability to handle failure, less perseverance in difficult tasks, less academic effort, and they're more likely to give up. So children who are told they're smart, they either think they can do a task or not just because they're smart, or they're not. So they're successful, they think, oh, it's because I'm smart. If they're not successful, they start to think, well, it's because I'm not smart. But children who are praised for their effort, when they're successful, they can say, well, I worked hard, And when they're unsuccessful, they can say, well, if I just work a little harder, maybe I can do it next time too. Okay? So instead of, I like your drawing, respond with things like, you must really enjoy drawing, or wow, it looks like you worked really hard on that picture. You should be proud of it. Or ask about the content of the picture. You must like cats. Do you have a cat? So the important thing there was the you should be proud of it. Yes, it's okay to tell your children you're proud of them, but more often you should tell them you worked really hard. You should feel proud of yourself, and give them that. So some of the effects of false praise, if we're giving praise when we don't mean it, false praise can make children more competitive. It can make them grade oriented rather than learning oriented, which means it makes them more focused on extrinsic motivation versus intrinsic. So the example is the child doing a picture just to try to get praise versus the child doing it because they like to draw. Children who get a lot of false praise are more prone to lie and cheat. Again, that phrase becomes a drug. And so they will lie and cheat in order to seem more successful so that they will get that praise. And they're less able to handle failure or frustration. So we will continue this in the next video.